Welcome to the podcast where mental health is at the core of what we focus on. We strive to develop people like you to maximize who you are and what you've been called to do by sharing tools and resources for better brain health. And now here's your host, Juan Garcia.
Welcome to the podcast, Mind Yours, where we focus on mental health and peak performance. Thank you so much for joining us. We've been discussing the topic of emotional intelligence, also known as EQ or EI. And the reason why we're discussing this topic is because it is truly what is moving the direction of so many corporations and organizations as it relates to how they hire people. Also, it influences heavily how they develop potential leaders within the organizations. So emotional intelligence has become this metric, this style of assessing or measuring how healthy the individual is as it pertains to their emotional intelligence. How aware are they of self, how they manage it, how socially aware are they, and how many skills, or do they have the skills set in place to socially interact. These are all measurements that are being utilized to hire, to promote, to develop. It's the approach that pretty much everyone is using. And so I found it helpful for us to discuss it on this podcast. And so if you're joining us for the first time, we started the discussion about EQ with a foundational piece, which is motivation. So if you were to listen to that piece, you'll get a nice foundation as to what is it that sustains this whole emotional intelligence topic. And then today, what I want to do is I want to focus on the first quadrant. If you also listen to the first episode that we discussed under kind of like the introduction of emotional intelligence, we discussed that emotional intelligence is broken down into quadrants, mainly 4 quadrants. 4 boxes, if you will, within the big box, which is your emotions. And motivation is kind of like either the core or the foundation of it. And so if you divide the box into 4 pieces, and then you have like a circle in the middle, the circle would be motivation, and then the 4 quadrants would be within that. And so today, this episode is going to focus on quadrant number 1, which is self-awareness. The question is, how aware are we of our emotions? And you may say, well, that's kind of simple. I mean, if I'm mad, I'm mad. If I'm sad, I'm sad, and I know it. That's not exactly the question. The question is, how are we connecting our emotions to the potential that it has to influence our thoughts and influence our decision making? Because it's important for us to know that the way we function is that we respond to things, whether we respond immediately or we process and then respond. We are responsive human beings, and we are also creatures of habit. And so we talked about the amygdala way back in the beginning of the podcast launch, and the amygdala has the capability and really the assignment to regulate either fight, flight, or freeze. Those are the 3 different responses that the amygdala is responsible for, and it's a gland in our brain, and we talked about that. It secretes the hormones that kind of get our blood pressure going, our adrenaline, and it responds to whatever we're feeling threatened with. And so when that occurs, it directly influences our emotions. And so we either feel scared, fearful, sad, joyous, happy, angry, etc. So because of that, if we are not consciously aware of how it's operating, meaning the connection, and in a healthy way, then we will always potentially respond in an unhealthy way. And I like to use the example of what's happening today, especially in our culture with social media. I think every week you find someone that is either a celebrity, a politician, someone of notoriety that you recognize, or it's a public figure, someone even from the religious sector, sports world, someone that you kind of can recognize, even if you're not a fan of that specific thing, that will issue an apology, right? Someone that has to right their wrong, someone that said, I was wrong. Even, for example, living within this cancel culture, we have videos and footage of things that are being pulled out from 10, 15, 20 years ago, trying to discredit someone because of something that they said or did, or a comedy routine, that now it's being held against them because it was insensitive, it was inappropriate, it was in bad taste, all of these different things that now are being attributed. And so the question is, why is this happening, right? Other than my initial response would be, we are definitely living in a world that has become more and more sensitive in terms of how they're receiving information, how they're receiving the people's intent. It's almost like we think we know what people are trying to say or do, and we know their motivation, which we don't always know that. And so because of that, people are demanding apologies. People are demanding that people get canceled, that products get canceled, that things get banned. And it's creating chaos because people that are extending these apologies, we don't always know whether these people are being truly, repentant, or asking truly to be forgiven, or that they even think that what they did was wrong. Because just because I say, for example, I can say right now in this episode something that could offend someone, and the next episode I come out and say, hey, remember I said this in the last episode, I want to issue an apology if I offended people, etc., etc. That doesn't mean that I think it was wrong. That just means that I'm issuing an apology and I'm trying to fulfill someone's need to hear my apology. So I say all that to say that a lot of times the missing piece of all of this that's happening, people issuing apologies, people saying things that are hurtful or that are embarrassing, people doing things that are embarrassing their name, their family, businesses, etc. All of this is rooted in a low emotional intelligence score. And it starts with the lack of self-awareness, which is what we're talking about today. People are walking around with very low awareness of their emotions and how they're connected to their thought process, their thought patterns, and also how that influences decision making and behavior. So I wanted to just touch some things that I feel that can help, because it's important that we understand that if our emotional attachment, it's called science of attachment, meaning if our emotional journey is connected to a specific caretaker that we had in our early childhood that was positive. So if we had a loving mom, a loving dad, a loving guardian, a loving adult that was tenderhearted, that nurtured us, that guided us emotionally, that when we were sad, that they, were there to support us and kind of help us navigate that feeling, or if that we were angry, that they were able to help us channel it in a healthy way, then if our science of attachment is healthy in that way, then we probably have a very high emotional intelligence score, or EQ, meaning that when we feel a certain way, we recognize it and then we do the appropriate things to manage the stress, because emotions have everything to do with stress. Positive emotions and negative emotions, they all are regulated by stress, because remember, the amygdala, that's what it does. It regulates stress. It shoots the adrenaline and the cortisol so that we respond. Whether we freeze, whether we flight or flee, or whether we fight, it's a response mechanism, and stress is the leading factor to that. So our signs of attachment matters, deeply matters. That's why when I sit with people in my office and I ask them, tell me about your childhood, tell me about your best, memory, and then tell me about your worst memory. Sometimes they look at me like, I'm here because I need to talk about anger management, or I'm here because I can't stand my wife, or I'm having, a hard time at work. What does that have to do with anything? It has everything to do with it, because the science of attachment proves that when we have a positive connection to our emotional development when we're kids, then we will have a high EQ. And if we have a negative science of attachment when we were, developing and growing up, then our EQ is going to be low. Because, and I'm going to read some of the information that I wrote down here, because what happens is our ability to manage core feelings like anger, sadness, fear, and joy, it depends on the quality and consistency of our early life emotional experiences. As I said, the science of attachment. But if our emotional experiences, for example, as an infant or as a toddler, those years, those formative years, if our emotional experiences in those years were confusing, threatening, or painful, it's likely that we've tried to distance ourselves from emotions. So in other words, if it's all of those things or one of those things, painful, traumatizing, not good, basically, then obviously we don't want to continue to feel that. And so when those emotions surface for whatever reason, now that we're older, we're adults, then because we don't want to feel them again, we distance ourselves. And so we don't allow ourselves to process in that emotion. And one of those emotions is anger. Very common to see someone that is seeking anger management because of court order or because of instances in the family, or someone said, man, you need to get help. The root cause of that 99% of the times is them distancing themselves from allowing the process of this emotion called anger to be healthy. And what they do is they basically stonewall, and they build a wall, and then when somebody tries to knock that wall down, that's when they come out and they sort of show how deeply rooted this anger is, even if it's just one instance, because they push it down, they push it down, they push it down. So very important that we are aware of our signs of attachment, what that experience was like. Sometimes I know of individuals that don't even remember those years, and that could also be indicative of that negative connection to that. And so your brain has suppressed that experience so that you don't experience it again. And what happens is, not only do you not handle or experience that emotion in a healthy way, but you also develop specific unhealthy ways to manage that emotion. And that could be self-gratification, that could be an illicit object, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drug related. And obviously these are things that now, for example, alcohol is obviously not illegal when you are an adult, and there's even a couple of drugs that you can obtain that are not illegal if used for medical purposes, etc. So some people may say, well, how is that illicit? Well, it's illicit because you know that it's not something that you should be putting in your body because it's not healthy. But because of your relationship with that specific emotion, that in your mind helps you deal with that emotion. And what you're doing is you're just putting it down, putting it aside, and almost avoiding the inevitable, that one day you're not going to be able to put it aside anymore, and it's going to bear its ugly head, and it's going to be deeply rooted, and so you're going to have to deal with it head on. And so what I want to do with this resource, this episode, is to make sure that you have self-awareness, and that self-awareness is rooted in how well you recognize your emotions and how you are managing, or not yet managing, because we'll get to that in the next episode, but more importantly, how well are you recognizing how those emotions play out and how you are responding to those emotions. If you're being called cold, oh yeah, he's cold or she's cold. If you're being called, dry, if you're being called overly, happy and bubbly, those are things that you should be cautious of to make sure that, your emotional intelligence is where it should be. Now, here are some questions that I want to share with you, just so that you can have introspection or evaluate whether there is healthy self-awareness of your emotions. And the first question is, do you experience feelings that flow, encountering one emotion after another as your experiences change from moment to moment? So a lot of times with emotional awareness or intelligence is that one emotion can lead to another emotion, and then next thing you know, you have a breakdown, or you're in a corner, or you lock yourself up in the room, or you don't want to talk to anybody, you give people the silent treatment, etc. So do you experience feelings that flow, encountering one emotion after another as your experiences change from moment to moment? That's one question to kind of consider. Another question is, are your emotions accompanied by physical sensations that you experience in places like your stomach, your throat, your chest? I know people that say that when they're angry, their hands shake, their ears turn red, and they feel like they're on fire. Their blood pressure rises. Some people feel a lump in their throat when they're scared or nervous. Other people, when they're facing a very difficult decision, they feel like a pit in their stomach. Other people, when they're excited or they're anticipating, something unknown, they get what we call butterflies in the stomach, a sense of queasiness. All of that, those are indications of, emotional awareness or self-awareness. Okay. Another one is, do you experience individual feelings and emotions like anger, sadness, fear, and joy, each of which is evident in subtle facial expressions? So can someone, when they're looking at you, tell by looking at your face what you're feeling? Because if they can't, that means that you're not probably aware of your emotions yourself. It's almost like you're talking to someone and they say, I'm excited. And you're looking at them like, well, tell your face that you're excited, because I can't tell. And so people that usually have that are probably struggling with emotional intelligence or self-awareness. Can you experience intense feelings that are strong, like they're able to capture both your attention and that of others, that people can tell? Because if not, then that could be a potential of, kind of distancing yourself socially with not only people, but with your emotion. And do you pay attention to your emotions? Do they factor into your decision making? So are you the type of person that will make a decision before processing it or looking at it, or saying, let me kind of weigh the pros and cons, or let me bounce it off of, a friend that I trust, someone that can hold me accountable? Do you just make a decision and then deal with the consequence? These are questions that you can ask yourself as it relates to self-awareness, because sooner or later you're going to have to deal with your emotional intelligence and how it influences your thought process and your decision making. Because there's two things that occur. You feel an emotion, it influences your thought process, and in turn, it influences your decision making. Or you experience an event because your emotion is influencing the decisions that you make or your behavior. So it can happen either way, right? You feel something and then you process it and then you make a decision, and it could be unhealthy, or you make a decision because you felt something and you didn't know how to handle it, or you weren't aware that it was actually anger instead of something else. And so you have to be aware, because at the end of the day, we are responsible for our choices. We are responsible for the things that we do, and we can't use the excuse of, well, I blacked out, or I wasn't thinking. Well, you got to. You have to think, because there's a consequence to every decision we make. Every single decision, and we're making hundreds of, and some people thousands of decisions a day. So the more aware we are of our emotions, the better the decisions we'll make, the healthier our lives, because self-awareness literally affects mental health. When we are aware of our emotions, then we know how to respond in a healthy way, and so our mind is right, our thought patterns are healthy, and then whatever we decide to do and our behavior is also healthy, and everybody close to us is benefited in a positive way because we are aware. So that's it for today's episode, self-awareness under the emotional intelligence theme. I am so excited that we're covering this topic. Please like if you like this video, comment if you think either I missed something, or you had a question, or you want to add something to it. I am always open to that. Subscribe if this is the first time you're listening or watching this podcast, or you've been listening and you still haven't subscribed. Subscribe, please. Help us out. Also, don't forget that our book is out in stores, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I said to myself, false beliefs that won't let me breathe. It's out. It's officially out, so you can pick it up. And also, if you do read it and you have the time, please give us a review. The reviews are what help us kind of get the name up, and then these places like Amazon and Barnes & Noble can see that people are responding to it and put us up there, and eventually there's recognitions, there's stuff like that, and we can celebrate together when we obtain those. So please pick yourself up a copy. I'll be sharing some of the tools in the future, but for now, make sure that you are self-aware. Make sure that you are processing your emotions in a healthy way, so that you make positive choices, good choices, the best choices that you can make to lead a healthy and a happy life. And your family and those close to you will thank you for that. 5 years and now, your 5-year-older self will thank you for it today. That's it for now. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning into our podcast. For more information, visit our website at juangarciaenterprises.com. Our host, Juan Garcia, is available for speaking, coaching, and one-on-one counseling. You can email us at info@juangarciaenterprises.com. Until next time, remember, we only have one mind, so mind yours.